Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Siddharth Bhatia. While at one end, legal constraints against Muslims have been growing, such as the Waqf Amendment Bill and the so called anti love jihad laws in many states, there have been many other provocations against them at an individual and social level. Hindutva groups have gone about singing and dancing in the most provocative way outside mosques during festivals to foment trouble and to create maybe violent conditions. Recently, during processions marking Ram Navami in Maharashtra, some marchers passed by mosques shouting very obscene slogans. My guest today is Kunal Purohit, journalist and author who has been covering Hindutva groups closely for many years, first by getting inside right wing WhatsApp groups, then through his book H Pop, which is a fine thesis of Hindutva influencers, and now by following such groups and such marchers, not just as an observer, but in a granular way, getting inside to see what they are saying and how they are creating violent conditions. His reporting has had a real impact, as we shall discover. Welcome to the Wire Talks, Kunal Purohit.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. Always a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Kunal, how long have you been following Hindutva groups?
Siddharth, I'd say since 2018. That's when I first sort of started, looking very extensively at what they were doing on WhatsApp. And then, as you mentioned, I did sort of manage to get into a lot of these WhatsApp groups that they run, and I started sort of realizing the kind of effect that they were having, and the cleverness with which they were being able to operate. And it started very interestingly with my understanding of how they were trying to discredit the media, on one hand, where and effectively on the other hand try and create the WhatsApp network as the parallel, but the quote unquote truthful media, the trustworthy media that people should use. And now, sort of so many years down the line, we see what it has done. We see that people have been trusting WhatsApp as if it is the utmost truthful source of news. But I essentially started seeing some of these patterns back then, and then as you pointed out, I went on to doing different things when it came to the way in which Hindutva groups really operate, in which they are able to mobilize, and in which they are able to disseminate so effectively.
No, when you said earlier in this response that you managed to get in, what does that mean?
Well, most of these groups, Siddhartha, are effectively closed groups, and they're targeted towards people either that they know or people that they wish to sort of mobilize, wish to lure into the Hindutva network. I was neither of the two, right? And because I knew some of the people who were a part of these groups, I convinced them to add me. And then, through a few groups you then get access into other groups, because often they're trying to cross pollinate, so they'll try and put links on one group to join the other, and so on and so forth. And so since then I just started that journey of getting into as many groups as possible. So I mean, I've also was on groups where Hindutva in the diaspora was operating and was mobilizing and stuff. So it was fascinating to see all of this.
So all of us get some forward or the other from someone. In a secular group, in a mixed group, you'll have one person who'll have access to that bit of information and he'll forward it. Um and it's hair raising, even so. What kind of things did you start seeing at that stage?
At that stage, and I had done a sort of a research paper on this as well back in 2018. At that stage, I saw a couple of things. One is that at that point, what was critical for the IT cell to do is, as I said, discredit the media completely. So what I would see, interestingly, is a lot of messaging that would involve, just that line at the end saying "Bikau media ye aapko nahi dikhayegi." So there was this constant harping on the fact that the country's media has gone to the dogs, and they're not showing you the real news that is happening. And according to these groups, the real news was that Hindus were being beaten up, they were being killed, or that, Prime Minister Modi was doing such a fine job, or, he was taking on enemies and so on. So it was creation of the myth, of course, but it was also reiterating and pushing of the stereotypes and prejudices. And they were both doing this as if it was actually all indeed happening. And as I said, the last line would always be about how the media was not showing them the real picture. So that was the initial sort of refrain, where they were constantly bolstering the Hindutva agenda, but also bolstering the prime minister's popularity and so on. And from there, of course, I've seen it take very different turns depending on when and what occasion it is. So to give you an example, when the war breaks out in Gaza and Israel, just after October the 7th, we start seeing a lot of propaganda and on all of these groups, which essentially tells Hindus that what's happening to Israel can happen to Indians and Hindus tomorrow. So there's a lot of propaganda that comes out saying, look, these Israelis trusted these Muslims, these Gazans. They allowed them inside the country, but look what they've done now. There's only one Gaza Strip in the Middle East, but in India there is a Gaza Strip in every neighborhood and so on. So that was the kind of rhetoric. So it's very interesting how they're tremendous as being able to be so pliable and amenable to whatever is happening, and then try and make it their own. And I see this every time. For instance, with Waqf, I saw massive mobilization on these groups, not right now, but for months and months. In fact, for more than a year and a half now. So it's very interesting how there is a sense of consensus creation on different mediums. Of course, WhatsApp groups are one of them, but on different mediums by Hindutva groups much before an event actually happens. I think a lot of us are left scratching as to how an event like this happens, or how a bill gets passed. But what I've seen is that the consensus making starts way well in advance. So by the time the bill is finally passed, a large majority or a substantial majority of the country is convinced that this is the right thing, because for months now they've been hearing about this on their WhatsApp groups and so on.
And also distorted history, I presume.
Oh, 100%. That as I said, there's one big bucket of reiterating stereotypes and prejudices. And that bucket has so many different sort of entry points. There's history, of course. There's the present. There's cinema. There's pop culture. There's so many things happening there. And then it always remains a very, very potent subject for them to explore each time they want to push the Hindutva agenda deeper.
Was even at that time, were they early days, or was things like the messaging on YouTube by individuals already begun, or did it come a little later? How what Because what I'm trying to get at is, you see, the WhatsApp groups, maybe in not such a rapid way, but WhatsApp groups and WhatsApp messages, at least, the famous one that I've got only about 1,000 times, about the Nehru family being fundamentally Muslim. We've been going on for a long, long time. So what I'm trying to understand is, did the YouTube influencers, Hindutva right wing influencers, did that was that a later phenomena?
Also, the way I captured it in my reporting was, I saw what we're now seeing on YouTube, which is this looking into the camera podcast sort of a model where all of these influencers come and essentially give you their analysis or their opinion. That was something that was happening on Facebook, very interestingly, because not a lot of people now do this, but at that point a lot of these influencers had started coming on Facebook live. So they would literally, it was the same format. It was then keeping the camera right in front of them and pressing the live button and connecting to all of their Facebook followers. Some of these guys had like 50, 80,000, or sometimes even more followers on Facebook. And they would essentially go live and record these clips and tell them what they were thinking. And at that point we didn't see YouTube playing this role in a big way. And slowly, I think, as they started understanding how the audiences were playing out, they started shifting to YouTube and essentially doing the same thing again. But in the course of things, of course, they only got better and better and more organized, where people started coming up with YouTube channels. YouTube was allowing them to monetize their hate, so they were very happy with that. They started bringing in guests like you're bringing me here today. So all of this started happening on YouTube much more. But I think the genesis of this somewhere was Facebook, where people essentially realized that you could also weaponize the video format and do what you were doing on WhatsApp groups, but on video. So that's essentially how I started seeing that. And I mean, back then I remember 2019 we used to call it the WhatsApp election, because WhatsApp really was the main playground for so much of this messaging. And it's only then slowly that YouTube started picking up, which is why the last election, the 2024 election, was often called the YouTube election. The election when YouTube started playing a very critical role. So I think I've seen that journey for a while now.
What kick-started your interest in what you have so succinctly called age pop?
Well, I mean, Age Pop essentially was a result of a reporting trip, Siddharth. And, I mean, I write this in the book as well. And since 2018, what I did start also doing, and we saw a very disturbing rise in hate crimes and lynchings, as you would know. What I did start doing was I started traveling to the ground to try and understand why these hate crimes were essentially taking place. And I would often sort of visit these sites many months after the incident had taken place. So the dust would settle down. Often the people who were accused of these crimes were released and back home and so on. And to just go back to those villages and towns and see why that particular person was lynched and so on. And I started finding that a lot of these hate crimes, a lot of these riots, a lot of these smaller clashes that never make it to the front page. I mean, they're always buried somewhere inside in your newspaper. A lot of them had some connection with music, and with music being played. And then that really was what kickstarted my curiosity, because I said, how can music ever be a factor when it comes to mobilizing people towards a riot or towards clashes or a killing? But when I started discovering just how deeply involved this particular form of music that I then call H pop was in communalism and communal riots, is when my interest really sort of took off. And that's when I wanted to understand who were these people who were creating these songs, what were the distribution mechanisms like, how was this all playing out. So that's essentially why I even started diving deeper into H pop.
After I read the book and I wrote about it, saying what I thought about it, so you should know, because it was groundbreaking. And in a sense, when you really think about it, the WhatsApp groups or the H pop were lying in front of all of us. They were right there. It's not some well that you have unearthed. They were right there, and nobody thought to pick up the thing and say, "Let me do a story on this." I suppose there must have been journalists who must have been constrained to do it, perhaps knowing that it won't go anywhere. But it was right there, and you went ahead and got into it. But after I read your book, I started seeing all kinds of tweets as well as on YouTube where I tracked up, the algorithm kept on throwing these things at me. And I found that these things were happening now, more and more of these very provocative Hindutva songs were being played, even at district level functions with functionaries sitting, etc. So it is not a YouTube phenomena. It's far more than that, isn't it?
100%, Siddharth. I mean, that's one reason why I even wrote the book and sort of chose to do it the way I did, because I didn't only want to capture something that is an online phenomena. I mean, people often mistake communalism to be that. My experience, honestly, was that this was a phenomena that may have some roots in the online space, but it is now firmly around us. It's now on our streets, it's now in our playgrounds, it's now a part of our festivals, it's everywhere. It's, I mean, I keep saying this, it's in cricket matches, it's in music concerts which have nothing to do with Hindutva or H-pop in general. uh, Music has, and H-pop music has really, infiltrated so many different realms. And that's also why I chose to write the book in the way that I did, which is essentially to show that these are all singers who, what they're doing, Siddharth, is that they're taking Hindutva to places where Hindutva never has been or has not been a part of that conversation, right? So let's say, spaces within, deep within, some states, rural, semi-rural areas, where so far the Hindutva mobilization had only been a political mobilization, right? Strictly political, in the sense that it was always top down by the party or by, by any of the affiliated RSS organizations and so on. It wasn't ever a part of the social or the cultural realm. What H-pop music, what H-pop poetry does, is allow it to just seep into these, these melas, right, where there's no political speech involved. So what do you do? I mean, then you get the poet who's going to perform that evening to be on your side, and then you get the singer who's going to perform that evening to be on your side. And I think that is what gives Hindutva such a potent edge, because it's managed to reach all of those people who, without even realizing, they're consuming, very cleverly and skillfully crafted political propaganda, are consuming exactly that, and are not in political settings, right? So they often come to these spaces, uh, keeping their filters, keeping their skepticism that we generally reserve for political messaging away, right? So they suspend that kind of skepticism, and they're here because they are a part of that festival. And when they come to the festival is when they hear words that essentially say that Muslims are terrorists and should be killed. Muslims are breaking Hindu temples, and hence, we must respond with violence. That Muslims are taking away or luring Hindu girls through love jihad. All of this is essentially the RSS, the Hindutva messaging that is so effectively then just sort of conveyed in beats and dances and rhythms. And that is what it makes H-pop so dangerous, I feel, Siddharth.
No, so what you're saying, Kunal, is basically the genie is out of the bottle. And though, if I recall correctly, in your book, you had said that many of these people were not particularly RSS oriented, they just found a niche for themselves. And that seems to have paid off. Somebody has picked them up and exploited it in a big way. And they have become part of our everyday existence, at least in some areas.
Absolutely. I mean, so, at no point do I ever say in the book, and even after, when I talk to people about it, that the artists who are creating this pop culture, Hindutva pop culture, are all, Hindutva foot soldiers. They're I mean, I joke about how the RSS isn't really going door to door and village to village holding, talent searches, right, for singers and poets. What's happening is that increasingly in different parts of India, singers and poets and artists who see that this is one space, this is one niche where there is immense scope for and immense potential for expansion or for, career progression, very willingly latch on to the Hindutva agenda and make it their own, because it gets them not just the money. I mean, virality is a big deal, but it also gets them the access. Some of the topmost guys I saw in Delhi as well, some of the leaders, some of the ministers would often, host these H-pop singers, would often have private gatherings where they would call some of these poets and make them recite poetry and so on. So, you're also hobnobbing with the top guys. I know one singer, Kanaya Mittal, who was being ferried around by the BJP in a private jet during the UP elections, of 2022, only because he was, one of his songs, "Jo Ram ko laaye hain, hum unko laenge," which was essentially meant to canvas for the BJP. That song became a massive viral hit, and the BJP was so keen on in cashing on his fame that they got him traveling in private jets, going from one rally to another. So when you see that there's a singer out there who's managed to strike gold with this, you want to emulate that guy, and then hence a lot of the other smaller guys who may not be able to achieve that sort of start going on that same path. So there's definitely a big chunk of the artists who do this. But it's not to say that there are not people who are not so ideologically wedded. There are so many I know who are so committed to the Hindutva ideology, even at great cost, right? And these are all people who, before the BJP became the dominant force that it has, had been holding on to these beliefs for many, many years, had been trying to push their rhetoric and not finding enough takers. And as a result, suffering immense loss of, finances, credibility, and so on. And for those guys, now is the time when they finally, when their patience has paid off, when their hard work has paid off. So I think you do find a bit of both. You do find people who are plain opportunistic and wanting to ride the Hindutva train, and there are also committed foot soldiers who believe that their skills are what they can contribute to the cause, and hence they must do that. uh, I can't hear you, sir. Sorry.
Let's just call this an umbrella idea, whether or not they are promoted by a particular organization or not, whether they are freelancers who have fitted it neatly with the RSS ideology. But the general idea, uh, and the songs ranging from something which is fairly in quotes benign to something downright provocative and violence inducing. This idea, do you think it has also begun to permeate educational institutions, colleges, schools, universities?
The you mean the idea of all of this
Of
pop
such
culture, this
songs.
in. Well, 100% to that. So even while I
Let's
was
say in
still
a college,
reporting.
let's say in a college competition.
Oh, absolutely. So you'd be surprised because even when I was still reporting the book, and this is my book came out in November 2023. So even before it came out, I would often come across videos from different colleges where some of these songs would be played, on their annual day or say college events and so on. So these songs had created that space in the youth. um, what I have seen since then, and recently I was in an educational institute in Ghaziabad in UP, and when I was talking to them about H pop, I asked them if they knew any of these songs. And this is a private educational institute where it'd be guaranteed that it'd be kids from the upper middle class or so. When I asked them if they had heard these songs, almost all of them had heard the kind of songs that I was playing. So H pop is also designed in ways that it reaches different audiences, right? So there are songs which are fast tempo, which have these EDM beats and so on. So you'd almost feel like you're at a rave party when you listen to them. And those are the songs that are meant to target a younger audience. The audience who'd love to dance on them, the audience that who would love to be with friends and sort of feel like they are in a party. But then there are also other songs which are slightly more sort of slower in their tempo. The beats are more devotional, and then they're possibly sort of targeted at an older audience. So that is the beauty of H pop in some ways, that they've been very careful in tailoring it to different sets of audiences. And then just to sort of end that point, I mean, I often sort of see the kind of people who come for these marches as well, right? Come for these processions that I saw recently in Mumbai as well. And most of them are youngsters who are under 30s. And they're all, Siddharth, and this is including in Mumbai, they're all singing the song while they dance, right? They know the words, they know the lyrics, and they're all singing along while the music plays. And I think that should tell you how popular these songs are, even among urban metros.
No, so I'm coming to that in a minute, from a different perspective. My attempt is to understand the overall uh, ambit of the entire Hindutva absorption of popular culture and media. ranging from WhatsApp to the next subject I was going to bring up, movie like Chava, which is, of course, a strong manifestation of the Hindutva idea. Some of them have been shown before, but they were crudely made. Not that this is any fine product, but they were maybe came early, maybe whatever. All these Maharajas, Rana Pratap, and the Peshwa in Pune. But those kind of films, uh, this is pure in its raw, undistilled form. One long session of anti-Muslim hatred. And so, where do you think? Have you looked at the movie culture at all?
In a small way, yes. I mean, I chose to not focus on films as much in the book because,
Not on
again,
the
when the
book.
book,
We moved on
yeah,
from the book. We moved on.
yeah. But in a small way, yes. I mean, I have last year when we were approaching the elections. I wrote a long sort of read for Al Jazeera about how Bollywood was a very willing ally in some ways in pushing the BJP's message across. And we've seen this since 2018, 2019, when the first set of propaganda films came out. The Filmuri, when the famous sort of line which became the BJP's campaign slogan, "How's the Josh?" And then people say, "Hi, sir." And so we've seen that Bollywood has essentially started playing that role for a few years now. And again, I mean, very cleverly has moved season to season depending on what the flavor of the season is. So if the flavor of the season is nationalism around Pulwama, around Pakistan and so on, then you give them a film like Uri, and people lap it up, right? And if the flavor of the season is history and revisionist history and anti-Muslim rhetoric, then you pass on a film like Chawa and people lap that up as well. So we've seen very interestingly how the Hindi film industry has and some of the A-listers as well, right? I mean, Vicky Kaushal is a very popular actor. I'm pretty certain that he's one of the highest paid actors in the current times and so on. So people like him wanting to willing to situate themselves as a part of history, playing roles like these, being in movies like these, and then also sort of, I don't know if you've seen some of the promotional stuff around Chava, which is that he's going around in open jeeps with saffron flags on the jeep and so on. And I mean, I'd be surprised if he doesn't see the significance, the political significance of doing that in a moment like this, right? So what we're seeing is that Bollywood has essentially agreed to ally with the BJP because that for them means that there is better business. I have seen and I've heard this from people who I know, that often even in cities like Mumbai, what happens when films like these come up, and this happened when Article 370 released, when Kashmir Files released, all of these films, is that often affiliated Hindutva groups organize sort of mass screenings. So there's a theater down the road, not too far from where I live, which was blocked off by some of these Hindutva groups, and then they would go to different slum pockets. This was during Kashmir Files. They would go to different slum pockets and go and advertise this film to be a film which every woman must watch because it's about women's safety and how to keep yourself safe when you're faced with danger, right? So I know some women who live in that slum, and they said, oh, when they told us that, we thought this was about protecting ourselves and domestic violence and so on. So all of us went there, only to emerge 3 hours later, having consumed sort of this undistilled pure hatred towards Muslims and what they were doing towards women. And then so what essentially has happened is that Hindutva groups have realized that films are able to reach audiences and do what top down political messaging can't. And hence they must be supported, they must be backed with whatever resources they can. I mean, I was talking to someone in London, and they told me that there were free screenings for them where Hindutva groups were organizing vehicles which would pick up people from across London and bring them to the theater. And the theater tickets can be quite expensive there, about £20 or so. All of these screenings were free of cost, being paid for by different Hindutva groups in the diaspora. So I'm saying that is how calculated Hindutva groups have been when it comes to promoting films that push the agenda.
What about the Ram Navami procession? Tell me about actually how did you go about doing that?
Well, I mean, so I mean, as I said, in some of the reporting that I've done and in some of the H pop that I've captured all of these years, I saw in different parts of the country and not as much in Mumbai how Ram Navami became, so the flashpoint of so many of these clashes, or occasions where Hindu men would go and either dance provocatively or sort of deliver hate speeches right outside mosques. The last few years I have started seeing that happen in Mumbai as well. And I've lived my life in Mumbai. I was born here, and I didn't have any memory of sort of seeing such large scale Ram Nami processions. So I remember 2 years ago in 2023, I went to Antop Hill in Vadala, where I saw this massive Ram Nami procession, and I was a part of that. And I saw some of the H pop songs playing there, right? And again, sort of kids who were literally 10, 12 years old, singing along, going. The yatra went to different slums and so on. And that was 2 years ago. I didn't get the chance to sort of do this last year, and so this year, when I heard that there were these rallies being promoted by different Hindutva groups, I saw it on social media that they were trying very hard to mobilize people to come and participate. And one of them was in Andheri, one was in Malad. There were a few others across the city. I decided to just go and see what they try and do, right? And how different are these rallies from what I had seen in set of different states in rural India, semi-rural India, and so on. And sadly, Siddharth, they were not very different. They were not very different in the substance. They were not very different in the behavior, because even here what I did end up seeing was that some of the most abusive H pop music was being played in these rallies. These rallies were very, very deliberately sort of trying to rouse and mobilize Hindu men by constantly chanting anti-Muslim slogans. That sometimes, the I remember this in Vadala. Some of the kids told me that the rallies would go from near the mosque, and it's only when the rally would reach the mosque is when the youth in the procession would be so mobilized that they would start wielding their sticks and their lathis towards the mosque as if they wanted to bring it down. And I saw some of this happening in Mumbai as well. So that's essentially what I wanted to do. I wanted to compare how different it was, and sadly come to the realization that it's not very different after all.
Are you saying that urban Mumbai has become no different from rural Uttar Pradesh?
What I am saying is that the attempt is to mobilize in the exact same manner. And the response that I see from people, at least in the limited exposure that I've had to multiple rallies, shows me that people are responding in the exact same manner. There are
But
people
that
who
could
are
be,
willing to dance.
Kunal, that could also be because the BJP is at the state level in the government.
No, 100%. I mean, look, there's no denying that all of this is allowed to happen because the state wants this to happen. There's no denying the fact that the state is pushing so much of this to happen, or at least, if nothing, I saw cops in the rally, and for 3 days, 4 days, the cops didn't do anything at all about the kind of slogans that were delivered, the kind of songs that were played. So the cops, for at least those 3 4 days, were willing to overlook everything that happened in that rally. What I am saying is that slowly we're reaching the point where people want to normalize this kind of hate on the streets, where people don't really get very bothered when they see anti-Muslim slogans ringing out. And people don't really get too bothered when they see Hindu men dancing provocatively and aggressively outside mosques. And this is not just now, Siddharth. I mean, even 2 years ago, this happened in Malad, and Malad. It's in the northern part of Mumbai. For those of you who don't know, this happened in Malad, where again a similar procession by Hindutva groups ends up outside a mosque. The sort of provocative dancing and the sloganeering leads to clashes. So we've seen that happen, and the idea is to constantly keep pushing it and constantly make it happen.
Is it mostly males?
I would say 95-98% of the crowd is male. Yes.
So you may see the occasional female.
Yeah, you do. I mean, so I would possibly say I could count the number of women who were there, uh, among the possibly thousands of men there. That's the ratio that I'm looking at.
And so far, what we've discussed is this. Of course, now you mentioned Mumbai for the first time, but is this normally a North India phenomena?
Well, in my understanding, it has been a North and a Central India phenomena. I mean, parts of Jharkhand, for instance, they've seen Ram Navami processions, they've seen Muharram processions. Both of these ending up in clashes and communalism being very rampant in such occasions. So we've seen parts of the country having this as 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 the right, or as the way that the festival is celebrated. We didn't, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, Siddharth, I mean, you know Bombay much better than I do. We didn't see this in Mumbai. We didn't see Ram Navami to be a procession, or an occasion where Hindutva groups would mobilize thousands of people, would have DJ trucks, would have bike rallies and so on. This idea that Ram Navami or Hanuman Jayanti, for instance, in which fell after Ram Navami, would see these Shobha Yatras, as they call them, is something that is alien to Mumbai. And so I feel like we're seeing this happen possibly for the first time in the city's history. I don't know what you think. I mean, have we seen this
Ram
before, Siddharth?
Navami, Ram Navami was never a prominent festival here anyway. I think the Maharashtrians are more or less focused on Gudi Padwa or on Ganpati, and the peripherals that happen may be happening, but they were not in any significant way. So there is constantly the role of drums being beaten, people walking out. So either either to put it mildly, give them circuses so they don't ask for bread, or I don't know what it is, but there is constantly something or the other going on, and Ram Navami may have fallen in that category.
So, I mean, the way I completely agree with you, and the way I sort of look at, this constant, almost pageantry of Hindutva, and Hindutva foot soldiers, I think for me serves a couple of purposes for the organizations. One is, I think it very clearly asserts a certain sense of hegemony, right? That these are our streets, that we choose to do what we want to do, and we will do what we want. It's sort of sending the message that we've now reclaimed our own country and reclaimed our streets. One is that. Second is that when you play these songs and when you go past different localities and neighborhoods, there are so many people who, and I would say a majority of the people who don't participate, right, or the onlookers who don't participate. It sends a message out to them, Siddharth, that this rhetoric is now normal, that it's okay to call Muslims mulle, right? Or it's okay to say that Muslims are targeting Hindu temples, and hence we must keep our
Also,
swords ready.
also, there was this sudden, completely irrelevant talk about Aurangzeb, as the Aurangzeb has anything to do with the Muslims of today. But the moment once the chief minister himself said something on those lines, that he has to guard it because it's the law rather than because of his personal preference, the signal was absolutely clear. So I suspect that much of this has happened in the last 3 or 4 years once the BJP has come to power. Because when the Uddhav Thackeray government was in power, these things were not happening. And certainly the police had far more freedom to act.
True, but the only rider that I would have there is, which gets me to the next point. I mean, the only rider is that most of Uddhav Thackre's term was during the COVID pandemic, when it would also be easy to
2 years, 2
quell,
years.
yeah, to quell so much of this by saying that where we're sort of facing lockdowns or very limited sort of mobilization and so on. The point that I'm trying to make, Siddharth, is that in some ways the genie is out of the bottle. And what I mean to say by that is that, assume that the BJP had not come back to power in Maharashtra. The nature of mobilization has been so immense, using on ground activities, using social media and so on, that the government would have found it very difficult to be able to say no to this procession right now, because the rules of the game and the political discourse now has changed so completely and so forcefully, that to say no to a Ram Nami Shobha Yatra, which the VHP, Bajrang Dal, all of these guys would definitely want to bring out, would mean that you are anti-Hindu, right? And then sort of that language that the Hindu right wing uses is such a persuasive tool that often non-BJP governments find difficult to shake off, that they also willingly give in and say, okay, fine, do what you want to do. So I'm saying somewhere the genie is out of the bottle, in the sense that the political discourse of the country is now changed immensely, and even the non-BJP parties have to be seen, quote unquote, respecting Hindu sentiments, right?
Uh, what is the police? Your story, your social media posts about the processions have had some impact. What has the police done?
Well, so what essentially did happen after the posts did go viral is that the cops, after initially sort of denying that this event even happened, the cops have registered a complaint suo moto in some ways, because it's the DCP of the local zone in Andheri that is the main complainant. And in his complaint, he has said that vulgar and obscene songs and slogans were being broadcast during this rally. So what they've now done is they've booked the three main organizers of the rally under a couple of sections of the BNSS, and then we're waiting to see if there's any other action on that. But essentially, as it stands, the sections themselves don't really mean much, and the maximum punishment under those sections is either 3 months of imprisonment or 1,000 rupees fine, or both. So we will have to see what happens.
Mm, so, shall we sum up to say, from WhatsApp groups to songs to movies to have all permeated, what you saw in the WhatsApp groups in 2018 has now spread and permeated to every section of society. Is that it? Whether
Worryingly,
by song,
yes.
whether by song or any other cultural projection.
Look, I mean, I think it's very clever, right? So when you first start off with your political messaging, you want it to be, an individual private conversation with people, right? You want to sort of do it in a way that nobody else comes to know that you're pushing this message onto Siddharth's WhatsApp phone. And once Siddharth starts getting those messages, he starts seeing what you're trying to say, is when slowly, the propaganda then becomes, takes it to the next level, which is that it then gets onto your social media platforms. So you start seeing that now there are other people on your Facebook who are also posting similar things, right? And then you believe that the tribe has grown, and then you take it to the next step. So you start seeing that now movies are being built on it, and then echoing the exact same things. And then you take it to the next step and you see that songs are now out on our streets. And of course, not to mention the fact that political leaders are now openly saying all of these things, right? When the prime minister calls Muslims and sort of refers to them as pancharwalas and infiltrators and so on, this is essentially the language that all of these guys have been using from day one on WhatsApp anyway. So what you're genuinely seeing now is a legitimization of exactly that propaganda that people in 2018 were possibly too scared to voice out in the open. You've now seen a complete normalization of that core rabid sort of propaganda, in a way that now people are echoing and screaming and sloganeering on your streets in Mumbai, outside Mumbai's airports, and there's very little that anyone is saying or doing.
Or on the planes.
Or on the planes, yeah. I mean, or in cricket matches, or in music concerts, or in college festivals. I mean, the list can go on and on, Siddharth.
Hmm. So, what's your next project?
Always a difficult one to answer, but it will be in a similar space. I mean, I still feel like there is more work to be done in just understanding the spread of Hindutva in different ways, and I'm hoping to be able to do that, both in journalism and beyond.
Has I had kept this question for the very end. Actually, has there been any kind of blowback on you, or to say, I won't say threat, but blowback to say, why are you writing these things? Why are you saying this? Why did you get onto this group?
Well, so very interestingly, my book launch in Delhi got cancelled at a very premier, very liberal institute, which hosts book launches every other weekend. And then we were all very shocked. I was shocked. My publisher was shocked. Similarly, I have got sort of these messages from different festivals and different platforms where the book could go, saying, your book is too political, and it's too critical, and we don't want to be engaging with it, and so on. So you've got the fact that the book doesn't get as many platforms as it does. Abuse and I mean, all of that, the harassment is all largely all online at this point, which is now part of the duty, right? I mean, it's part of the game when it comes to being a journalist in India who's even slightly critical of the establishment. So there's been all of that, but I mean, it's nothing that would dissuade me from doing my work. So that, so it's
No,
it's
no,
it's
no.
it's okay.
That is your reaction, but I'm just asking whether there has been anyone picking up the phone to you and saying, "We'll see you."
No, I mean, as I said, it's all been online. It's all been sort of through the internet, either on social media or like emails or whatever. But there's nothing in person so far, at least. No.
Okay. So that was this is a conversation which is a work in progress. I mean, we are going to be talking about these things, maybe not you and I, but others will be continuously talking about it. But what you have helped me do is to distill what your experiences were 7 years back, and what you saw 7 years ago is now blown up. As you said, people were perhaps too scared to voice those opinions at that stage, but now it's all around you. So, and maybe from uh, that point of view, it has not even begun, because the country is quite large and the south of India is not yet touched by these things, or the east, for example. So, sooner than later. So, it's a shame, and it is not, it is un-Indian in a manner of speaking, because this is not what India is or was or should be. Thank you, Kunal, for helping me coalesce all these points together. That was Kunal Purohit, author of Age Pop, but much more than that, a constant monitor of Hindutva hate in on various social platforms and on in real life. We'll be back once again next week with another guest. Till then, from me, Siddharth Bhatia, and the rest of the team, goodbye.